going to be talking about asset management. Excuse me. And, Kevin Marcia, 1 year, and very familiar with what he's doing.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Do you still live in Orange County?
Chelsea, yes. Yeah, sure.
Chelsea certainly has been interesting
Chelsea.
in terms of the political.
Peter Kennedy.
Well, they had no select board there for a while.
Well, you're looking at someone who just got elected because
Wow.
4 of the 5 resigned. So yeah,
You're on a select board?
I am as of several weeks ago.
Why
Yeah,
would you do that?
that's a really good question,
No,
Senator.
that's good that you do it. That's good that you do it.
I
That's a
think-
commitment.
I think some have labeled me a glutton for punishment, but that's okay. So
Okay, we're live, I guess, right now. Okay.
okay. Good
Yep.
morning.
Sure, good morning, here.
Kevin Marshy from the Agency of Transportation. I am the currently the director of the Asset Management Bureau. Going to kind of talk through what we do in the Asset Management Bureau, give you a high-level overview this morning. Certainly happy to answer any questions along the way. I don't know, I've got a dozen or so slides, and I think we've got about an hour. It may not take a full hour depending on questions. So kind of the overall definition of asset management, and this kind of sums it up pretty well, is the right treatment on the right asset at the right time. And really what that really kind of talks about is or drives at, if you will, is, you have a bridge, right? And trying to get to do the preservation on that bridge, sealing the deck so that the water and the salt doesn't get in before we have to rebuild the bridge, kind of thing, is really what we're talking about there. When the right treatment, right asset, right time. Sometimes we do have to rebuild the bridge. Sometimes we have to do a more substantial treatment on a paved road or something like that. Sometimes we can get by with a little bit thinner and kind of keep those good roads good, kind of thing. Sometimes we can line culverts, sometimes we can't. The idea of asset management, I'll get into it a little bit more, is how we do the analysis, the system we have that kind of puts it all together and allows us to look at the network level of how we're treating our assets. Who are we? There's 33 of us in the Asset Management Bureau. Large number of those is we have inspection teams that do the bridge inspections. There's 13 people almost completely dedicated to bridge inspection. We have 9 or 10 bridge inspectors. That's what they do, especially March through November each year. We've got 4,000 bridges out there on the network between interstate, state, and town highway. There's federal requirements that exist for us to do those bridge inspections. We're very fortunate. We've got a lot of folks that have been here a long time. They're trained. They're all dedicated, and it's kind of a neat blend of people that are doing the bridge inspections across the state. It's interesting work, and it's challenging work. Yeah. It absolutely is. Between some bridges, when you're out on the interstate in South Burlington trying to inspect a bridge in traffic, and sometimes you're dealing with high water and different things. But we're very fortunate to have a really good team. We have engineers, technicians. I think one to really highlight is our GIS professionals. Back when I started my career at V-Trans, GIS was something that was kind of just out there, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. But everything we have now has has a geolocation of northern easting. It's mappable. You can click on it. You can get information. It's so far ahead of where we were even a decade ago. We're really moving
How many
forward.
bridges do we have?
There's 4,000, just over 4,000 bridges. Yes, yeah, and I have a slide here with some other asset
I was
facts.
amazed to know how many culverts we had one day. It was up on the list there.
Yeah, well, you're going to see it again in a
Oh my
moment.
God,
It's
I couldn't believe it.
absolutely.
That's a lot of
The
bridges.
inspection cycle,
Jenny,
same for highway bridges as for railroad bridges.
well, I would say yes in general, but the Federal Highway Administration on the highway side of things, we have to be on a very rigid 24-month schedule. And if we inspected it in April of 2022, it has to be inspected in April of 2024, not May of 2024. So there's some rigid guidelines.
But you could do the month before.
We could, but we try to keep them kind of on that same timeline, on the same schedule.
Equalizer work.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
You have one truck that goes up to the bridge, or do you have more than one?
We have one that will go over the bridges. There's also one that can go on the rail lines as well.
I know you got the snooper truck.
Right, well, yeah, there's 2 snooper trucks. One,
So you only can use one truck for all 4,000 bridges? You have to.
yes, but not all of them require. There's a limited number that actually require that snooper
Oh,
truck.
okay.
You know, a lot of them we can, if you think of some of the smaller bridges,
Underneath.
a ladder or whatever.
You know, you throw yourself over the bridge that goes Winooski there, that one bridge, he goes over there on that stupid truck. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not the job I want that day.
Yeah, you talk about dangerous. That's a great example.
The Williams River, that's a
Yeah.
high bridge.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah,
Squeaky.
Oh,
yeah, Queechee's another one. I tell our bridge inspectors, I will go out with you, but I'm not a fan of heights. I'll take some notes for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk to you on the walkie-talkie.
Right, exactly. So, you know, what we do, it's here, it's kind of the full, and I'm gonna get into a little bit more. Bridge inspection is just one piece of it. But we talk about data, and when I start talking about the assets, and I'll talk a little bit about our pavement data collection and the number, there is a tremendous amount of data that comes into, you know, into our systems. And we have systems that kind of look at, it comes in the condition data, but we also have, you know, as an example, our pavement management system is the one we've had the longest time, where, you know, we have deterioration rates, and we take all that condition data. There's 4 different stresses, millions of data points that we pick up through a contracted vehicle. You know, I was upstairs earlier and there was a question, do you have cameras? Yeah, absolutely. There's high resolution cameras on the data collection that can pick up, I think it's up to a 2 millimeter wide crack, right? So, you know, the tip of your pen kind of thing. So there's a lot of data that comes into the system, and we manage it. We build those systems, but it all feeds into our budgets, and how we go through and identify, you know, projects and select projects, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. This slide just kind of indicates like it's the life of an asset, and that could be the life of a bridge, it could be the life of a culvert, it could be the life of a traffic signal. And what we try to do, a lot of what you see, what we do in asset management is in the top left, where we take all that data in, we look at the planning. We're kind of the link between the planning and the engineering side of things. But we, you know, what we do, and you'll see clearly the data, right, is we actually are very involved. We kind of touch all different places within the agency. The design piece, a lot of what we do is with the project selection. We're helping select the projects, and we pass them, you know, next week is it, you'll get your budget book with a list of projects. Our job is to go through a process with the regional planning commissions and others to identify what those projects are that we then pass off to design, that then get constructed. And then any asset spends the vast majority of its life in the maintenance side of things. And so we are heavily engaged with our partners on the maintenance side of things as well.
Just a quick question, obviously, the culverts. Culverts that were put in 20 years ago or whatever, they were metal, and life expectancy was probably, today, the new culverts last longer, do you think, or they're gonna be about the same?
The intent is that they'll last longer. I mean, with the smaller culverts, and we've been using them, I don't know how many years, but it's kind of the corrugated plastic pipes,
That's
you know,
right.
and they seem to be lasting so far really well. You know, they're not as susceptible to some of that, you know, soil conditions, acidity,
So
whatever.
I was wondering what metal going for that.
Right, yeah, salt, you name it. So we're hopeful, but we don't have quite that amount of experience yet, but so far, and they're not all, I shouldn't say that they're all plastic. I mean, we still are getting obviously some metal, but there's a lot that's been learned over the years too.
Okay.
And so hopefully, yeah, we're gonna get some longer life with the culverts. Here's the slide I was talking about, to the culvert point, you know, less than 6 foot diameters,
49,000.
small culverts. You know, let's round up and call it 50,000. Right, and those are the assets that nobody pays attention to historically, right? I mean, I can say even sometimes within the agency, 20 years ago, we didn't even have an inventory where they all are. When I talk about data, they're all geolocated. They're on a cycle of inspection now. It is difficult if you think about a 100-foot long, 24-inch culvert. We really don't know what's going on in the middle of that culvert, you know, but we actually have in the past few years, I'll call them remote control cars with cameras that are fairly inexpensive. In some cases, we can't get to all of them because that would just be a huge undertaking, but the ones that we have concern. So this just kind of highlights, like, you know, you think about traffic signs, right? You know, a sign is a sign, you know, you see it, you see a stop sign, you see an exit sign, you don't really think much about it. There's 67,000 of them, you know, and that's a pretty
How
considerable
many
thing.
culverts would you say you replaced in 1 year on a yearly basis, the 49,000, 50,000?
Well, that's a good question, and
Okay.
well, but it's, you know, and I'll touch on it right now. in the last few years, one of the things that we've done is we've started really emphasizing small culverts and a little bit more strategically. It's part of kind of this asset management. We know where they are, we know what the condition of them are. I would say, Senator, and this is an estimate, but probably of small culverts, I'll estimate around 500. It might be a few more, it might be a few less, but it wasn't that long ago that we probably were only doing, say, 100 to 200 a year. So we've really put an emphasis on, we've worked to look for different funding sources that we can invest in the small culverts. One of the things for some of you that have been around, you know, it used to be, it was 20 years ago when we said we had a paving project. We said, we have a paving project and we're going to pave the road black from here to here, and we're going to put yellow and white lines on it. We're trying to be a little bit more proactive. I'll touch on that a little bit with kind of a corridor management approach where, and it may not be that we're replacing those culverts with the paving project, but in the last few years, what we're doing is we're starting to replace culverts ahead of paving projects. So we may be doing the year before. I'm sorry?
Route 2, all the culverts got replaced on that section that's subject to repaving. It's in
Right, the Marshfield Danville section. Yes, absolutely. That's a prime example of what we've been trying to
I
do.
tell you right now, they're kind of bump.
They are,
Yeah.
they are, and
They're slumping.
there's some good and bad associated with that. One of them is we're actually getting that consolidation, which is a nuisance right now. But then when we go out and pave it, you know, we'll pave it off, we'll regrade it a little bit, and that compaction will be there. So the new pavement hopefully won't have that divot in it. So there is a little bit of benefit to that, but it is a nuisance, and it's a nuisance to the drivers. It's a nuisance to our plow truck drivers, honestly. But it's helping us get ahead of this particular asset class, which is what I would call is probably the one that we've probably emphasized the least over the years.
Yes.
These are so important, most first, somewhat for safety, but also because if they get clogged up, then the water builds up and it just wipes out the roads, which gets really, really expensive. So this is really preventative maintenance to stop us from.
Absolutely. And it is, it's that preservation topic. I mean, it's interesting because they also will plug up and they'll back up and they could be flooding things out upstream of them as an example. There's a lot of different scenarios associated with it, but we're trying to get ahead of it. Some of these have been there 70, 80. I mean, there's culverts under, you know, we have some concrete roads still in different places, Route 5 or Route 2 has some of these, those were put in the 1930s. And we have culverts underneath those roads that down on Route 4, I can think of a couple of examples that, you know, they were stone culverts. And then maybe we put an old boiler on the end to widen the road a little bit. And then we added a piece of concrete pipe, and then we added a piece of metal pipe. I mean, some of these things they've just been there for a long time. They do, they do. But we're really trying to put some emphasis in there and make sure we're getting ahead of it, because, you know, a lot of times you don't see it until it's too late. So a lot of other things here. One thing I like to mention, you know, 900 miles of guardrail. It's probably over $500 million worth of guardrail that we have on our network. So when you start to kind of think about just guardrail's a guardrail, we all drive by it all the time, right? That's a lot of value that we're trying to manage across the network, and that's safety, right? A couple of current initiatives we have, and I could take any one of these and talk to you for an hour, but I won't bore you with that. But, you know, a couple of things I think that are important to highlight. A number of years ago, well, back in I'll say it was the mid 2000s, we came up with our first project prioritization system. A number of years ago, you know, we worked and there was legislation passed directing us to kind of re-up, if you will, on that selection and prioritization system. So now we have a system. We've broadened it. It used to be we kind of looked at asset condition and safety and not much else. And we did have a component for regional / community input, but we're now looking at, there's 8 criteria now, you know, mobility and connectivity is a piece of it. Economic impact of a project is part of it. There's an environmental component. So there's a lot of other things that we're looking at, factors that are built into that project selection process. It's not completed yet. We've gone through it for the roadway programs, the traffic and safety, the paving programs, the bridge programs. We're still developing it for some of the other programs or other modes as well. But that is a partnership. Important to mention, that's a partnership with the regional planning commissions and the transportation advisory committees. They all have a member from each town, if they 10. They're engaged in this process. One of the things with this process is we identify potential projects based on our management systems. And then we send them to the regions. And if we send them to the regions, and it happens not all the time, but let's just say we sent a list of bridge projects and said, here's the list based on our prioritization. The regions have an opportunity through their community to say, hey, V-Trans, you forgot this one, right? You know, it may be a few years ago, you know, it may be that we said, no, we're not going to add a bridge in Bradford as an example. But now if we forgot it, you know, and for some reason there's a regional, you know, there's a regional component to it, they can add it into the mix. And there's a scoring to identify
Are
that.
you doing something with the Bradford Bridge?
It is in the program now. Yes.
Sure looks.
And you'll hear more, but that's actually, I'm not using that just because I'm in the committee with you, Senator. That's actually an example that we've used as to how this system is working.
Sometime, if you would, I know with Better Roads and Bridges and all that, when I was a town select board member, they brought our roads in and they just showed us our roads. Couldn't believe it, our back roads especially. But sometimes if somebody wanted to come in and show what you guys actually have on a screen for somebody's roads, like
Sure.
the amount of detail that you guys have, it is mind blowing. It's kind of neat.
What we have on the state network is, I mean, today versus when I started, it is, I mean, I can go to a map right now and you pick a road in a town and a culvert and I can click on it and see all the data, the inventory, when it was last inventory, what the condition is, it plugged. It's pretty amazing. And that goes back to a lot of folks in the asset management throughout the agency, but our GIS folks are just, it's incredible what they can do. The next one is our asset management information system, or VAMIS. What we're developing right now, we've had a pavement management system since the mid-90s. We've had various versions of a bridge management system. What VAMIS does is it's taking 24 different asset classes, all of those that you saw here and more, and it's putting it all into the same system. So we will have the data, we will have deterioration rates for all of the different assets. And I use as an example, pavement management has the paving has a pretty complex deterioration model, mathematical. For the smaller signs, we say the deterioration model is, you know, if the sign's been out there 15 years, then it's time to replace it. So, you know, it goes from very complex to very kind of rudimentary. That's kind of I'll say that the research that's out there is the signs, the retroreflectivity on the signs, it lasts about 15 years. So we will have this system with all the 24 asset classes in it. We will be able to run analyses to say, if we invested $5 million on signs, which one should we invest in? We've done it for years with paving. We want to invest 125 million. It gives us some recommendations. There's a lot of things in it, but a lot of it is based on cost benefit. So it takes into account, you know, the traffic volumes as an example, and a lot of different things. I will mention that we don't just push a button and say, hey, here's the roads that we're going to pave.
How do you ever do it 25, 30 years ago without all this information now that you have it? It must have been difficult. So now they put all of online on the computer here, and it just, imagine doing that 30, 40 years ago.
Paving as an example used to be windshield surveys.
That's why they built them the last.
You know, and if you think about trying to manage a network of 3,200 miles through various different people doing window surveys at different times of the year, you know, we did our.
I served in this committee where the members decided whether to pave.
That was in my early days. That was still happening, Senator. Absolutely, right?
Thank God, like I said, I'm so proud that the committee now has no jurisdiction over pet projects, nothing whatsoever. But years ago, it was all done through, okay, you got a road up there, and oh my God, I used to sit here as a newcomer, and I'd say, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. But today, it's done by the book, exactly what you recommend. You take charge. That's the way it should be.
Right.
And
Occasionally, people want us to slip something in.
Yeah.
And we'll say no.
but that's
Right.
very rare.
We'll say
Yeah.
no, unless there's something very compelling. And we did have that a few years ago on that cross Vermont bike trail where there was a desire to
Sure.
add it, and it was understandable, but
But it was out in the open.
it wasn't part of the plan, and it was way at the end, and so it was, that gets you into that ad hoc kind of approach, and so we were fairly vigilant
Well, I
about that.
can remember some senators the Capitol Hill across the hall, stuff used to go in there. Over the years, it was, I can remember one time getting up on the floor reporting a section of the bill, and it had changed overnight. And then, you know,
Yeah.
there was a particular person that added some projects overnight, and here I am saying, wait a minute, I don't know what it is, you know, but that was happening. And thank God today,
That's why you have to take the bill up to the secretary.
oh my God, it's just it's
And
a different environment.
But it seems to be too that you guys seem to nail where the, you know, the where the problems are, even if you don't even realize it. But there was a section of the road just outside of Craftsbury on 14, and it was just that kind of that one section going up through and this and that. It was just boom, 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 boom. And
Right.
next thing you know, I went up through there and boy, they've got this all fixed up.
And the
Yeah.
towns have regional planning, so they submit their request, which is nice.
Absolutely.
When I hear of a road being, nothing to do with me, that was a regional, they all decided that overpass should be done or whatever. Nothing, no fingerprints from me, that was done by them.
Yeah.
They recommended, you take that list, you go over it, and you say what's doable, what's not.
Absolutely.
Senator,
So my question is actually related to that. So last spring, one of my towns in my district was really struggling with some advocacy on a project that was going through there, and they were looking to me to help. And I did my due diligence and so on, and ended up emailing the secretary, and I did involve my CCRPC, Charlie Baker. But what role do you see for senators when you have municipalities expressing prioritization requests that?
Go to the agency,
It won't work.
give them someone at the agency.
Because
Well,
it's trying to do an end run around this,
Don't even
this
give them all.
data-driven process.
So actually, the starting point, because we get those, is to talk to the regional planning commissions. And that's not, but because we are partners, like, and I think I would say this, and I'm hoping that every director of regional planning commission that might see this would agree, because we're coming up with those potential projects based on the data and the conditions. And you know, I'll go back to the bridge in Bradford, Senator, because it's a prime example. The bridge itself, over the years, is in pretty good condition. The sidewalk isn't wide enough, the railing is in terrible condition, and it's kind of the gateway into the
And the
community.
cement is pretty well gone and you're down to just stuff.
Right, right, but from a bridge management
From a
perspective,
structural perspective, it was still safe.
right, so that's a prime example of, it might not come through our management system, but at the regional level, there's other things, and all those factors I talked about, the community component, the economic component, the connectivity and mobility. The regional planning commissions, if we send them the list of potential projects, they may say, and actually Bradford was one of those projects we recommended this time around, but over the years, they may say, the region may say, hey, through the TAC, this one is a priority and we'd like to put it into the mix. And so then it comes in and it competes, right? And that would be my suggestion, is to send, we're happy to talk with folks, that's not me trying to
That's what I
dodge
do.
it.
I have them call the agency, there was salt shed, they had some grants for salt sheds.
Right.
I said, here, call the agency, I give Joe Flynn or Michelle, they'll direct you where you get the grants,
Right.
how to go through it.
Right.
Not my fingerprints on it, but there is some don't understand there is programs for these things.
Right.
You know, they're talented, don't understand, but then they go, they say, wow, there's a grant we can get, okay, meet the standards.
Right.
You hear that, Charlie Baker? I'm sending them your way.
I think the one bridge I
And
was,
Charlie's gonna say, oh, Kevin, you did it to me again.
I think the one bridge I was so happy to see replaced is the one right there in East Montpelier that crosses the river right there. It's like, somebody just please fix that bridge.
The singing bridge?
Well, no, actually, it's the one that goes, 14, yeah, it
The
goes,
light in.
with the light in, when you guys put the light in and it goes to
Oh, okay,
Perry
yeah,
right
sorry,
there.
yeah,
That
14 is
that thing was just like, oh my, oh my God, it was like, oh, just fix it.
The one in Bradford looked worse.
Really?
From
Yeah.
the- From the,
Agreed.
if you were looking at it visually,
Yeah.
but, yeah, and then of course you put the light in at that intersection as well. And I have to say, having that intersection on Route 2 and that, gives you much, with the light, much better visibility. That was always difficult. And the slope of that hill on a snowy day on Route 2, sometimes you had a hard time getting up that hill.
Senator, you didn't put the paving program in appropriations for Dan Village.
No,
Okay, all right.
Very well maintained road.
actually, that paving program stops at the Cabot Damble up to
Right.
line.
Because those projects are, we're getting closer. We got 2 out of 3
So
done.
I'd like to point that out.
But we're
Most most of it
Oh,
is-
there we go.
Most of it is in Center Perchlik's district, to be honest,
To be honest.
because it's Cabot, Marshfield,
It goes from
that whole
Marshfield to
stretch.
Danville, yeah, to
Yeah.
West Danville,
yeah,
yeah.
and people forget that that's Cabot on Route
I wanna
2.
make sure.
And
Kevin
that whole
brings the
section,
sheets.
they actually call themselves Forgotten Cabot.
Yeah, over on Route 2.
Yeah, the old Hookerville's section.
Okay, go right ahead. We get carried
That's
away.
another-
I remember those days well. Those are my early days, Senator, of
You and
picking
I-
projects up, putting them down,
Oh, yeah.
and then we'd have to go to the community and say, they'd say, why aren't you working on my project?
Oh.
Well, actually, when we
The
were.
legislature didn't
I've
fund
got it on the list. That's the book
That
we
big,
do.
Yeah.
they
And the
want,
list was so long, it didn't mean anything, but
and I said, if I was
Created
ever
the
chair.
impression you'd done
it would
something.
happen.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we've made progress. The last part I'll just point out about the VAMIS system is I've talked to you about how we select projects, the data. The other side of that is the maintenance side of things. And we have a system right now that does some maintenance components to it. But what we're working to develop here, and again, it goes back to that full cycle of, so, you know, what we're looking to do is be able to generate what we're referring to as work orders. And again, working with our maintenance partners, but looking at that data. And it may be as simple as saying, hey, district, hey, North Montpelier Garage, here's the 37 culverts that are showing up as plugged. They actually do the inspections, but they show up as plugged. The funding piece exists in there, the resource piece. So we're trying to, this is going to be a very holistic system. And the idea of it is also is that, you know, if there's a lot of data in it, but is to draw it back out and ultimately would be something that will even, you know, from a dashboard perspective that the public or yourselves or others can see, how are we doing? Right? You know, maybe not seeing which culvert's going to be placed tomorrow, but just kind of general overall network awareness. So this system is going to be all encompassing.
Is this the VAMIS system also the scoring system that you use?
No, so that's the VPSP2. They work together, right? The output and the analysis of VAMIS. And that, you know, so it says, hey, here's based on what the system's seeing, here's the potential projects. We do some engineering judgment. It you know, it feeds the VPSP2 project selection process, and then we go on.
And that VPSP2 is relatively new.
Yes, yeah, I'll call that the second generation of our prioritization. Our first one in the mid 2000s started to solve that issue that Senator Mazza was speaking of. You
When
know,
wasn't it just like a couple of years ago? Like,
yeah, we're entering the 3rd year, but the first 2 years were kind of a pilot, working with the regions, working at the Kinks.
so this is the first year of full implementation of it.
Yes, yeah, we still have some modes to develop, but the major programs are running through that.
Did Grand Isle Drawbridge start before this new prioritization process?
St. Maz's name.
Yeah, yes,
Anywhere near that.
yes, Senator, it did.
Yes.
Why want?
So, you know, and I can talk about all of these things, but you know, standardizing budget and monitoring, part of this is just having the systems to keep track of everything and where we're investing the dollars that we have, and looking at that process, and the project selection process really helps that as well. Corridor management, I think it's really important to mention that. There's kind of corridor management principles. I mentioned earlier, there was the day that a bridge project is a bridge project and a paving project is a paving project. You know, I'm sure all of you have driven around, whether on a town highway or a state highway, where the road gets paved and the next year we go out and we replace the culverts. Everybody scratches their heads and says, why did you do that, right? Or there may be a bridge need, right? And so historically, what we may have done is we have a paving project, there's a bridge need, we let the bridge folks take care of that later. The idea of corridor management and those principles is that we're taking a look at those sections of road. Overall, we're managing a network. When we start this high-level VAMIS stuff, we're not looking what I refer to as lines and dots on a map. We're looking at managing a pavement network, a bridge network, and managing those together.
Look at Waterbury, they did the whole thing. One time.
Exactly.
Underground, sidewalks, curbs,
Right.
utilities, everything is done for the
Right,
next 50
exactly,
years or-
Exactly. And that is a good example of like a downtown piece that we looked at.
Messed it once.
Right, but we're also looking at, and Senator Kitchell mentioned it in terms of Route 2, we did those culverts in advance, right? And we're looking at the bridges and saying, hey, this bridge could just use some preservation. It's not adding $3 million to a $6 million paving project, there's $250,000 worth of bridge preservation we can do. We're trying to incorporate that together. We're looking at the other modes. We're trying to understand what else exists out there on the network. You know, we may think that, you know, for whatever reason, a 3-foot shoulder is appropriate for vehicles, but maybe looking at the bike ped mode, maybe a 4-foot shoulder is what needs to be done out there. We're trying to make sure we're accommodating that within the resources that we have, within the level of investment we have, and looking at it not as just a line or dot on a map, and not just looking at it as a bridge project or a paving project. We're trying to make sure we have a more holistic look at it and taking into account, you know, the community desires as well. I'll say this, both community needs and maintenance needs, and that's something we need to talk about, the community needs, but over the years, sometimes our maintenance folks would say, why aren't you doing this with this project? And we're trying to make sure that corridor management principles, if we're looking at 6 miles of paving, we're looking at the entire corridor. It doesn't mean we're going to do everything with that 6 mile project, but we're aware of what the needs are out there, and we're making a conscious decision to include it or not. If the bridge needs to be replaced and it's $5 million and it's a $5 million paving project, we're probably not going to just throw a $5 million bridge project on top of a paving project. But what we might do is try to coordinate that work a little better than we maybe have historically.
You know, looking at it holistically, one of the things that's kind of, we've had some discussion with the, you know, RPC, and that's when they put in that new section of Route 2 and down by Bonsai Bridge, as they call it, the connection to North Danville is up on the limited access.
Right.
So cyclists can't get to that section because it's prohibited. And you aren't supposed to walk on that. And so what they've done is they put, the way they've designed it is you've got a segment of restricted access that has basically closed off anything other than car traffic to that road that goes up through to North Danville and swings around.
Right.
And, you know, cyclists have been really concerned because they'd like to do the loop, and they technically aren't supposed to be on that section of road. So I hope that, you know, there's kind of taking a look at where are we, you know, how are we bringing those roads in, and how are we accommodating the fact that there might be other uses than simply the car.
Absolutely, and that's an example, something I think we'll probably be back here at some
And
point
that was
talking
done
about.
years ago, but,
Right. Well, we're also looking at, and using bike ped as an example, working with the regional planning commissions. I think there was legislative language last year, working with the RPCs and them working with the communities to identify those gaps and opportunities for the bike ped mode as an example. So.
yeah, because some people might find it very enjoyable to take the North Danville route up to Danville and then take the Loyal Valley Rail Trail back to St. Johnsbury and do a loop.
Yeah, and sometimes those connections are pretty easy, you know.
Well,
and
there's a potential for a culvert. We looked at it and it's kind of out there, but nothing's happened on it. But maybe as ridership comes, but I suppose some of these smaller roads also pose a safety issue for bikes as well.
Just quickly, modernizing bridge inspection and bridge management. We talked about bridge inspection earlier, but you know, it was not that long ago that our bridge inspectors would have a cool pick camera with a whole bunch of cards, and they're inspecting bridges, you know, and they end up with a stack of, you know, we now actually have iPads for all of our bridge inspectors. You may see them, they might have them on a lanyard around their neck with these heavy duty cases, and they might be up on a ladder. They're taking pictures of the defects. Those defects are, you know, they're coming into our system. We've been able to modernize through this new system our bridge inspection reports. If you look at our old bridge inspection reports, they're pretty engineering, if you will. And of course, we inspect town highway bridges as an example. The new reports, because we have this technology, they have photos. If there's a town highway bridge that has a defect, the bridge inspector is taking a photo of it and saying, hey, this bearing just needs to be cleaned off, kind of thing. And it's very intuitive and clear for us and for the town. So that's just an example. I mentioned earlier the small culverts, just trying to better integrate those into our everyday thought process. preservation, we've talked about it a little bit. I won't bore you with that, but, and I'll get into it a little bit more. I got a couple more slides, but our focus on preservation that we started probably about 15 years ago, kind of keeping the good roads good, if you will. Keeping, that's an example, keeping the good bridges good. We had a bridge inspector that had been a bridge inspector for 30 years. He just retired, incredible knowledge. And, I remember him coming to me and saying, here's the photo of the bridge in 2006, and the joint was leaking a little bit, but we didn't fix it. And here's the picture in 2010, and you can see the concrete below it starting to crack. And here's what it is in 2014, and you can see the concrete starting to crumble. And here it is in 2018 Eden Bridge, right? That preservation, that investment that we're trying to do. You've probably heard of it with some of our paving activities, right? This past summer there's 2 parallel routes in central Vermont. One that we invested with fairly significantly with a paving project, a reclamation, a few years back, was in pretty good condition. The parallel route was in really bad condition. This summer, we just put a really thin coat of asphalt over the one that was in pretty good condition. I call it painting the barn roof. We're keeping that, but from the public's perspective, it's like, what the heck is wrong with you? This road is much worse. But if you can do this one for $150,000 a mile and prolong its life, keeping it good for another 10, 12, 15 years at $150,000 a mile versus maybe $1 million or $1.5 million a mile over here. That's that network balance that we're trying to do. We obviously are concerned about the road that's not in great condition, but if we can spend, it says it here, if we can spend that little bit of money now, keeping that good road good, long term, it frees up some dollars so you can start getting to those worst roads. And I've got an example of how that strategy is working. I should have reversed these next 2 slides because, but anyway, network condition bridges. This just shows the progress that we've made over time, both with and I was asked earlier, what can you attribute this to? One is the level of investment and support that we've received. We've received a lot of additional funding, especially in the last decade for bridges. But the other is the preservation approach. If you can keep that good road good. Oh, sorry, those things aren't supposed to pop up. If you can keep those good bridges in good condition, it just saves you that increased level of investment down the road.
You always have the federal guideline or whatever it is. Do you have how this compares to other states?
We do. I don't have it off the top of my head, but over time we've bumped up on the list of how we compare with percent.
I assume you're required to submit this to the Fed.
Absolutely, yeah. There's reports out there. They do.
So the Feds would have here's the list of all the states.
Absolutely, yes.
What do the Feds do with it?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it is a comparison. I think
They report it to the Congress.
I think it informs policy in some cases.
They start a Corvette in a garage.
Whoa.
But it would be helpful if the Feds make it available to the states, because you could be always below the
National
threshold, but
standard.
still be 30th of other compared to other states.
Or it might be nice to look at how well New Hampshire's doing versus New York or.
Right, particularly our
We
neighbors.
should do that.
We do, yeah, absolutely we do. I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but we have
You have it, I'm sure, on your device.
I'm sure I could find it, yes.
Because we often see this graph. In fact, we usually see it 4 times. Like the secretary shows us on the first day, then you show it, then somebody else will show it. So it'd be interesting to see another comparison compared to our neighboring states.
Sure,
And I
sure.
imagine with all the monies that we've come from the Fed, that these numbers might even get better in the next 10 years as these projects work through. And
I would say yes, but we've reached it, and
Yeah,
interestingly,
it's hard to
it doesn't show on here, like the dash is our performance measure and we're exceeding it.
Yeah.
The problem is that these assets continue to deteriorate, right? It's like, back to the example, you paint your roof and the next day it starts to deteriorate already, right? And depending on what the materials are and the environment, we got to keep up with it. So we can't let off, but the strategies we're using is clearly working. This is indicative of the fact that we are making good progress for sure.
Every time we see this, there's a qualifier that says poor still means safe. I feel like words matter. Do we choose the word poor? Or is that a federal one? Because I mean, maybe
It's a federal.
priority maintenance or
It's a federal.
priority concern, because you know, if you're one of the communities with the poor condition bridges, it sends a message.
We have to say that a lot. Actually, I had a conversation this morning with one of the bridge management person. I'm like, all right, remind me what the condition state is. Is it a 5 or a 4 that triggers the poor? It isn't. It isn't safe. It isn't unsafe. When it reaches poor, it means one component of the deck, the superstructure, the substructure. It's the lowest one of those.
Covered bridges are structurally deficient.
Right. Well,
By definition.
and for that reason, we've chosen to kind of migrate away from that a little bit because, you know, a covered bridge isn't obsolete or structurally deficient just because it doesn't handle, you know, log trucks and it isn't, you know, 30 feet wide kind of thing. So
We gotta talk to you about a covered bridge.
This is the first time I've said this. They
If
send
it's
it
like-
to
you
the-
have to
Oh,
check
yeah,
on the
Chittenden
plan.
in charge.
So let's talk about an airport.
You need to ask. him
Whatever
if
you'd
it's
like to do.
In the plan.
Right.
If it's not in the plan, you're out of line.
Right.
Apparently.
this, and again, you've seen this, but I
Yeah,
think
with
it's really,
different colors.
I think it's really interesting to highlight this 8%. The performance measure that we have is 25% or less of our roads in very poor condition, and you see this 8% here. And I believe it was 2007, we were at 36% of the network was very poor. So there's about 900 miles less roads in very poor condition statewide than there was 15 years ago. And that goes to the increased investment, but also that preservation strategy that's working. This is my last slide. I've said a lot of things. I'll just touch on these a little bit. Again, kind of that integrated management of the asset lifecycle through our VAMIS system. We're hoping to get to that point where where we can optimize the investment across the asset classes, where we say, hey, what if we reduce spending in bridges by 25 million for the next 10 years? What would that do to the bridge network? And we want to put it in culverts, or we want to put it in paving, so that we're able to kind of balance that level of investment, and we know what it is. And again, it's been super beneficial to the network, to the condition of the network, but also just the communications that we're having with folks across the state. You know, and it doesn't matter if you're on a select board, it doesn't matter if you're a legislator, or if you're just someone that happened to be fishing under a bridge, looked up and said, well, what is this? It kind of helps us tell the story a little bit more. I mentioned the corridor management. Those principles are so key to what we're doing. Because when we're investing in some section of road, some bridge, whatever it is, we need to make sure we're looking a little bit more holistically at what's going on out there from a maintenance need side of thing, from a community need side of thing, or maybe just other assets that are close by, or safety.
I would say a good example of that actually is that intersection we were talking about. Because you put in signage, I mean, you've got the lights now. You've got an extra turn lane, so people don't come over that kind of brow.
Yeah, it flows a lot better down through there.
Yeah, rear-ended, so that's an example of safety on the intersection combined with the bridge
Right.
construction and adding that turn lane, so to me, that's a recent example of what you're talking about.
There's a sidewalk component to that. There was some drainage underneath. I believe there was actually at that intersection, there was a house I think we ended up buying it that had, like, the brook came down and ran underneath through the house and then across Route 2 to the windows. I mean, just some really important things that need to be addressed. So I'll mention the reduced investment in the emergency repairs and emergent needs. You know, those are the things when they become emergent, they become emergencies, they're costly, right? They're not planned. We pay more for materials, we pay more for contractors. There's a lot more disruption to the traveling public because it's like overnight we had to close something. What we're trying to do in the strategies we're trying to put out there, and knowing the condition of the assets, some of which we didn't even know that well before, is allowing us to be more proactive at managing the network and hopefully ultimately starting to see fewer and fewer of these emergency situations. That said, we've got 50,000 metal culverts, some that are nearing 100 years old out there. We're trying to get ahead of those, but that's a considerable thing that we're trying to address.
Yeah, that would be an interesting graph to see the emergency. Do you track expenditures as like, well, this is an emergency and this one, like, so that you could show that their costs are going down because of smart management of the assets?
We are doing a better job the last few years of tracking that. It used to be like, let's say at the district level, there's something that comes up and it's an emergency, they just roll out, they fix it, and it's like, we did it, which is good, right? They're
It's just
very
part of
active.
another culvert project, but it's not listed as an emergency.
Right, exactly. So we're trying to do a better job of capturing that so that, to exactly your point, so we can start to see that trend over time.
Yeah.
And then obviously it goes without saying, but it's everything that we're trying to do. And this isn't just an asset management. We kind of, as I said earlier, we kind of spill into a little bit of everything that, we're trying to involve at least tangentially in a lot of different things on the highway network. It's really trying to maximize that return on investment. That's it.
Okay,
That's it.
good. Good overview.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you
good.
very much.
Very
Do
nice.
you ever have anybody, take us off?